Welcome to the Plato Paradigm, a paradigm shift in reading Plato's dialogues. Episode 127, Meno 90e to 91a. Anytus has just agreed that someone who wants to learn a techne should be sent to people who claim to be able to teach the techne and make money from teaching the techne. This is clearly where Socrates wanted Anytus to be, because now he gets round to talking about Meno specifically and the type of thing Meno wants to learn. We ought to remember that Meno didn't want to learn anything. This is an indication that what Socrates is about to say is also going to be somewhat different from what has been talked about so far. Is Socrates doing this in order to get a reaction from Meno, or is he saying anything that he thinks Anytus could understand? It's probably both. And we shouldn't forget Meno's entourage, who are probably listening. The contrast between what Socrates has already said in the conversation and what he says now is one of the ways in which people begin to learn to think critically. But it does require them to do the contrasting. They need to remember what has been said in the conversation. They need to recollect, and they need to apply that to what is now being said and realize that there is some inconsistency, and then they have to know what to do with inconsistencies. In the conversation with the slave, we saw that when they arrived at a wrong conclusion, they went back to the beginning and looked for a new line upon which to construct a square. Is this discussion like that? Do we go back to the beginning every time we ask what arete is? Do we go back to the beginning every time we find that the teachers of virtue that we have arrived at are not teachers of virtue? Do we then look for different teachers? Let's see what happens. Nun toinon existisse met emu koine bulio estai peritu xenu tutui menonos. Well then, now it is possible for you to consult in common with me about this here xenos, menon, or Meno in Latin, in English pronunciation. Anytus and Meno are xenoi. In Athens, Anytus is the host and Meno is the guest. In Thessaly, Meno would be the host and Anytus would be the guest. But in both cases, they are both xenoi. Each one is a xenos. Why does Socrates mention the fact that Meno is a xenos here, and he's the xenos of Anytus here? A little later on, we'll see that part of virtue is knowing how to welcome and send away properly xenoi. Socrates is raising the awareness of everyone at the moment that Anytus is the gracious host of Meno. One other thing to note is that Socrates suggests that he and Anytus consult about Meno, and Meno will be shown how to consult. At least this will be a version of a consultation. In the past, when Socrates has told Meno that they should search together for virtue, Meno hasn't really cooperated. So let's see if Anytus is better at cooperating. By the way, the slave was fairly good at cooperating. He didn't have much initiative. We can expect Anytus, a politician, an Athenian democrat, to have more initiative, more of an opinion. Houtus gar, o anite, palai lege pros me, hoti epithume tautes te sophias kai aretes, he hoi anthropoi tas te oikias kai tas poles kalos dioikusi, kai tus goneas tus hauton therapiusi, kai politas kai xenus hypodexasthai te kai apopempsai epistantai axios andros agathu. For this man, Anytus, for a long time is saying to me that he is desirous of this sophia and arete by which people manage both the households and the polis, the cities, beautifully, and look after their parents, and understand how to receive and send off both citizens and xenoi in a way worthy of a good man. Nearly everything Socrates says here is wrong. First of all, it isn't true that Meno for a long time is saying that he is desirous of this sophia and arete. It's interesting that Socrates is combining sophia with arete, an expertise and virtue. All Meno was interested in was Socrates' opinion, which option Socrates chose concerning the sort of thing that virtue is. And now here is Socrates saying that Meno is desirous of it. In other words, he lacks virtue, and Meno should have reacted to that. Socrates goes on to describe this arete, virtue, and there are several parts. The first one is completely false, that it's the virtue which allows people to manage kalos beautifully, households and polis, cities. According to Meno, there isn't an arete like that. There's one arete for men to manage a city, and there is another arete for women to manage well the household. When Socrates subsequently combined those arete into one where there is management, managing things well, it was refuted, because well was split into justly and sound-mindedly, and that meant that it was management with two other virtues. So that was not a definition of virtue. Looking after parents hasn't been discussed at all. So where did Socrates get that from? The final part should give us a clue, knowing how to receive and send away citizens and xenoi. This was yet another thing that hasn't been discussed until now. It's not been considered a virtue. Who in this dialogue is the most likely to know how to receive and send away xenoi? Well, the one with most experience must be Anytus. And if we look at all the other parts of this so-called arete, virtue, we'll see that they are all fitting to Anytus. I say fitting, they appear to be fitting at least. Anytus would appear to be able to manage his household. He's clearly managing the city, and he must be looking after his parents. At least Socrates has talked about Anytus's father. That should do. And he is the one who knows, or apparently knows, how to receive and probably send away xenoi. All of these actions are parts of the virtue which Socrates claims Meno is desirous of, but he ends by saying, in a way worthy of a good man, which is redundant because we're talking about virtue, and virtue is the characteristic of good things, good people. If we have to qualify these activities by saying that they should be done in a way worthy of a good man, we cast doubt on the activities themselves as virtue. This is exactly what happened with Meno's definitions of virtue. Whenever Socrates then asked, are they to be done with justice, with sound-mindedness, Meno agreed they should be done with these other virtues, which implies that activities themselves are not virtues. So once again, Meno should have reacted to this last point, because virtue should not need to be qualified by another virtue. In fact, Socrates' definition of virtue here, or his description of the virtue Meno is desirous of here, is regressive, because not only has Socrates reverted to the Gorgian way of defining virtues as tasks or activities, but this particular virtue is made up of a number of different activities, and this is never a good thing in a definition of a concept. In this example, if virtue is a composite of a number of activities, does that mean if someone does only one or two or three of those activities, but not all of them, does he have the virtue? Is the virtue only present when the person does all of the activities associated with that virtue? Meno probably only sees that Socrates is being generous with his explanation of the virtue under discussion. And what about Anytus? What does Socrates expect Anytus to understand from this list of activities, this composite virtue? Clearly, Anytus would expect Socrates to say that this is his virtue, Anytus's virtue, because he is the one who knows how to manage a household and a polis and look after parents and accept and send away xenoi in the right way. If Meno wanted to learn this virtue from anybody, he would learn it best from Anytus himself. But Anytus doesn't claim to teach this virtue, nor does he make money from teaching this virtue. So now we can appreciate why Socrates spent some time preparing Anytus to look for someone who isn't Anytus.